getting more time out of our lives, right? But we want quality time. Being as free from sickness as possible and avoiding any chronic illness and staying fierce. And chronic diseases are becoming more and more common in aging Americans. And while it's true that genetics do determine your lifespan to a certain extent and your susceptibility to diseases, your lifestyle has a very significant impact. So right now, the capacity of the human machine, my life expectancy, your life expectancy, the average maximum life expectancy of a human being is about 90. But right now in this country, the life expectancy is 79. And that's all because of lifestyle. So we're leaving 11 good years on the table. I don't know if you've heard of the blue zones, but the blue zone is a non-scientific term given to geographic regions that are home to some of the world's oldest people. And it was first used by the author Dan Buettner, who was studying areas of the world in which people live exceptionally long lives. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you on a brief journey around to these parts of the world and teach you some of their lessons. We're going to focus on what they eat, but there are a lot of other things they do that maybe we can talk about in the future. And then I'm going to open up for your discussion and for your questions, and how you might think you can incorporate some of these ideas into your life. So Dan Buettner of thebluezones.com teamed up with National Geographic and the National Institute on Aging, and they spent 3 years finding these places all over the world where people lived to the average age of 100. They had the highest life expectancy in the world, and once he found these places, he sent teams of experts around to find out exactly what they were doing. So the first area is a place called in Sardinia, Italy, where, as you can see, they eat mostly whole grains, they eat 12% vegetables, and they eat a fair amount of dairy, a tiny bit of meat, beans, very, very little added sugar, and fruit. So they live in a mountainous region and they typically work on farms. This area is 2 miles off the coast of Italy, and they eat mostly a plant-based diet. They do eat meat, but not every day. They eat meat in celebratory settings. And the men are some of the oldest men in the world. The second area is Okinawa, Japan. Here you can see they love sweet potatoes, and they have very little meat again. So Okinawa is home to some of the oldest women in the world, and they eat a lot of soy-based foods, and they also practice Tai Chi, which is a meditative form of exercise. And what they do is really interesting. They adhere to this old idea that you eat when you're 80% full. So you never eat until you feel like you're completely full. So they eat till they're 80% full. And that's been an old adage for 2,500 years. The third place is a place called Loma Linda, California. They eat, I believe they don't eat any meat at all. You can see how they're eating. A lot of fruits and vegetables. They're strict vegetarians and they live in tight-knit communities, and it's believed that this longevity is based on their vegetarian diets, but they're twice as likely to reach, they're twice as likely to reach 90, and frequently they live to be over 100. Okay, the fourth place is in Costa Rica, Nacaya Peninsula in Costa Rica, where again you can see here very little meat, fish, and poultry. It's very heavy with grains, dairy, more added sugar than the other areas, but you know it's still very much less than we have here. And just if anyone's interested in any of this information later, I'm happy to email, so you don't have to worry if you're going to miss something. Their diet is based around beans and corn tortillas. And they eat very little processed food. It's a primarily plant-based diet, and it's very antioxidant rich tropical fruits that they're eating. They do eat meat, but only a few times a week. They eat their main meal early in the day, and they eat a light dinner very early in the evening. This is another way that they stay healthy. So this is some of their exotic antioxidant-rich fruit. And the last place we're going to look at here is Icaria, Greece. You can see that they eat 5% meat. They're eating a lot of vegetables and greens, a lot of olive oil. So this is Greece, where they eat, they also have red wine. Is that on this list? Yeah. Oh, it isn't. Well, they do drink red wine. So they consume mostly what we would consider the Mediterranean diet. And they live about 8 years longer than we do. So this is the Mediterranean food pyramid, where you could see it's meats very little. They do consume wine in moderation, and then poultry, eggs, cheese, and yogurt. Fish is a big part of the Mediterranean diet, and then of course fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. Okay, so, all right, so I'm just going to briefly take you through the other 6 areas that we're not going to focus on much today, because they are things that these folks do. So on connection, they have a feeling that they belong in their community. They put their loved ones first, and they really have a tight-knit community. So that's their connection component. They move naturally, so they're getting exercise, but it's usually a natural form of exercise. And they have a very healthy outlook. They feel like they have a purpose in life. They get a decent amount of sleep. They know how to relax. But we're going to focus on these 3. We're going to focus on how they eat wisely. Okay. All right. So they don't restrict their food intake. In fact, they all celebrate with food. But we can create a culture similar to theirs, and we can have a long, healthy life as well if we adopt some of their behaviors. And it starts with food choices. Most of the Blue Zone residents have easy access to locally sourced fruits and vegetables, largely pesticide-free and organically raised. And if they don't grow these fruits in their own garden, they know where they can easily get them locally. They have inherited time-honored recipes, and they develop their own recipes, because if you don't like what you're eating, it doesn't matter how healthy it is or how good you think it is for you, you're not going to want to eat it. The particular foods most important to the centenarians and the Blue Zones varies from one culture to the next. And what may be just important as their food selection, as they developed over studying numerous Blue Zones, is finding the best way to translate those habits to us here in the U.S. So this is how I've broken this down. This is what they consider you should be doing on a daily basis. Eat 95% plants, go wholly whole, get a daily dose of beans, drink mostly water, and go nuts for nuts. On a weekly basis, they say fish is fine, eliminate eggs, and slash sugar. That should be slash sugar and carbs. And on a monthly basis, try to reduce dairy and eggs and retreat from meat. So the first one we're going to go through is people in 4 of the Blue Zones consume some meat, but they do so very sparingly, and meat is eaten on average 5 times a month in portions that are about 2 ounces. So think of a deck of cards. Rather than occupying the center of the plate, meat is like the side dish. And it's thought of as a celebratory food, and a way they flavor primarily plant-based dishes. Blue Zone residents eat a wide variety of vegetables in addition to beans, fruit, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. They eat at least a half a cup of cooked beans and 2 ounces of nuts every day. And in addition, they focus on naturally nutrient-dense whole foods, not processed foods, so not foods that have like 50 million ingredients. So how can you do this? So one of the ways you can do this is keep your favorite fruits and vegetables on hand. Don't try to force, like I said before, don't try to force yourself to eat foods that you don't like. They might work for a while, but then that's going to fizzle. Try to get fruits and vegetables that you like. Keep them in your kitchen and stock up on them. If you don't have access to fresh, affordable vegetables, frozen vegetables are fine. It's better than not having them. In fact, frozen vegetables often have more nutrients in them since they're flash frozen at the time of harvest and they're not losing nutrients on the commute to your grocery store. Another way is you can use olive oil like butter. So saute vegetables over low heat with olive oil. I do this almost every day. You can also finish steamed or boiled vegetables by drizzling them with a little bit of olive oil. And you could always just keep olive oil on the table. Another way you can make 95% plants the way you eat is to stock up on whole grains. We found that oats, barley, brown rice, and ground corn figured into Blue Zone diets around the world. Wheat did not play a big role in any of these cultures. And the grains they used contain less gluten than the modern strains do today. So a takeaway tip is to just make a simple swap. So replace meat with beans in a Mexican bowl or a chili or a soup or a stew, and take a processed snack, trade a processed snack for a handful of nuts and a piece of fruit. I tell all of my clients, just carry a little bag of your favorite nuts around with you if you're going to go out. Like I always carry like almonds or cashews with me, just a small handful. This way, if you feel like you're going to get hungry and you think you're going to be tempted to eat something that you don't want to eat, you'll have this on hand. Okay, the next tip is to go wholly whole. So eat foods that are recognizable for what they are. Another definition of a whole food would be one that's made of a single ingredient, raw, cooked, ground, or fermented, and not highly processed. Eating only whole foods, people living in the blue zones rarely ingest any artificial preservatives. So how can you do this? Shop for foods at local farmers markets or community-supported farms. Avoid factory-made foods. And avoid food products that are made with more than 5 ingredients. So you see this example here? This could be considered a healthy food, but anytime I see anything with a list, even a quarter that length, I say no. And if I can't pronounce something on the list, I'm not eating it. I'd rather just eat a handful of nuts or a yogurt or a fresh vegetable. Okay. A daily dose of beans. So as I said before, the folks in the Blue Zone diet average at least half a cup of cooked beans every day. Beans are the cornerstone of their diet, and they're long-lived populations that have 4 times as many beans as we do on average. One 5-country study financed by the WHO found that eating 20 grams of beans daily reduced a person's risk of dying in any given year by about 8%. The fact is that beans represent the main superfood in the Blue Zone diet, which we'll go over later. And on average, their beans are made up of 21% protein and 77% complex carbohydrates. So that's the kind of carbohydrates that delivers a slow and steady energy rather than the spike you get from a refined hydrate like white flour. And beans only contain a very few percent of fat. They're an excellent source of fiber. They're cheap. They're versatile, and they come in so many different varieties and textures, and they're packed with more nutrients per gram than any other food on earth. Human beings have been eating beans for at least 8,000 years, so it's part of our culinary DNA. The Blue Zone dietary average, which like I said was at least half a cup per day, provide most of the vitamins and minerals you'll need. But because beans are so hearty and satisfying, they'll likely push out less healthy foods in your diet. So how can you do this? So I always try to find ways to throw beans into anything. So if you have beans on hand, you could throw them into some vegetables. You could throw them into a salad. You could throw them into a soup. You could throw them on top of fish. You could just put them with everything. Make sure that you have beans. So dry beans are the cheapest, but canned beans are quicker. When buying canned beans, be sure to read the label to make sure they're not putting any extra preservatives in there. And when you work with canned beans, try to make sure to remember to strain and rinse them with cold water before you use them. That gets rid of all that gaseous producing ingredient. You can also throw pureed beans as a thickener to make soups creamier and protein rich. Okay, rethink your drink. People in the Blue Zone pretty much consume just 4 beverages: water, coffee, tea, and red wine. So you can drink coffee for breakfast, tea in the afternoon, and wine after 5, and water all day. But never drink soda, and that includes diet soda. So water, studies show that being amply hydrated increases your blood flow and decreases your chance of a blood clot. In addition, if people are drinking water, they're not drinking sugary, artificially sweetened beverages, which can also be a carcinogenic. Coffee, research is finding associated with coffee is a lower risk of dementia and Parkinson's disease. And tea, people in all of the Blue Zones drink tea. The Okinawans nurse green tea all day long, and green tea has been shown to lower the risk of heart disease and several cancers. Red wine. So if you're not already drinking red wine, I'm not advocating that you go ahead and start drinking red wine, but it is something that everyone in the Blue Zones pretty much does do. It's typically standard to say that no more than 2 glasses per day for women and 3 glasses per day for men, otherwise they'll show adverse effects. So how can you do this? Keep a bottle of water everywhere you go. So I everywhere I go in my apartment, I'm walking around with this. And this is a liter of water, and I usually have 4 a day. Feel free to start your day with coffee, but just try to keep the sweeteners to a minimum or nothing. And if you're going to use creamer, try to make it a non-dairy creamer if you can, or just very little. And try not to have any coffee after mid-afternoon, because that will keep you from falling asleep or staying asleep. And another thing that the folks in the Blue Zones do is they make sure that they get 8 hours of sleep a night. Feel free to sip green tea all day long. Green tea usually contains about 25% as much caffeine as coffee, and it provides a steady stream of antioxidants. And you could also try a variety of other herbal teas. Sweeten teas with honey. So keep a pitcher in your fridge for easy use in the hot weather. I usually have green tea in my fridge. I usually don't put honey in it, but I have honey just in case. Never bring soda into your house. So ditch all forms of soda in favor of water or unsweetened tea. Upgrade your carb-heavy beer or sugary mixed drinks for antioxidant-rich red wine, and enjoy this as part of a healthy meal. Okay, this is one of my favorites. Go nuts for nuts. So a handful of nuts is about 2 ounces, and it appears to be the average that most Blue Zone centenarians are eating. Here's how nuts are consumed in the various Blue Zone diets. They eat a lot of almonds in Icaria, Greece, and in Sardinia, Italy. They eat a lot of pistachios in Nicoya, Costa Rica, and all nuts in Loma Linda, California. The nut eaters on average outlive non-nut eaters by 2 to 3 years, according to a study that the folks in Loma Linda did. Another recent study in Harvard followed 100,000 people for 30 years and found that nut eaters have a 20% lower mortality rate than non-nut eaters. Other studies show that nuts reduce the bad LDL cholesterol by 9 to 20%, regardless of the amount of nuts consumed or how much fat is in them. Other healthful ingredients in nuts include copper, fiber, folate, vitamin E, and arginine, which is an amino acid. So how can you do this? So have nuts around. Nuts are literally the first thing I eat every day is a handful of usually mixed nuts, sometimes with dried fruit in them. Take nuts wherever you go. If you're going to go out, just have a little bag or a little little container of mixed nuts with you. And try, like we said with beans, try adding nuts to pretty much everything you're eating. You can throw nuts in a salad, nuts in a soup, nuts in a stew. It adds a nice texture and flavor, and sometimes you don't even notice that it's in there. Fish is fine. So up to 3 ounces of fish daily is what they consume in the blue zones. Think of 3 ounces as a deck of cards before it's cooked, and select a fish that's not threatened by overfishing. People who live the longest were not vegans or meat eaters, but they were pesco-vegetarians or pescatarians. People who eat plant-based diets with a little bit of fish, up to once daily. In other blue zone diet, fish was a common part of everyday meals, eaten on average 2 or 3 times a week. So how can you do this? Learn what 3 ounces of fish looks like. And so like I said, it's sort of like it looks like a deck of cards. Favor mid-chain fish. So these are trout, snapper, grouper, sardines, and anchovies. Whoops, did I mute myself? Sorry, don't know how I did that. I somehow muted myself. I apologize. Oh, okay. And steer clear of farmed fish, which are typically overcrowded pens that make it necessary to use antibiotics, pesticides, and coloring. Okay, reduce dairy and eggs. So now I know I'm getting into areas that might make people feel emotional, but hang in here with me. In 4 of the 5 blue zone, cow's milk products are not included in significant amounts. Folks in Icaria, Greece, and Sardinia, Italy consume goat and sheep milk products. And people in all 4 blue zones eat eggs about 2 to 4 times per week, usually 1 at a time. And they incorporate it into a dish rather than make it the main thing. So like in other words, if you're gonna eat an omelet, instead of having the omelet be the main thing, have the omelet be, or the egg be the side thing, and mainly focus on having like greens and fruit and nuts and then an egg on the side. Arguments against milk often focus on its high fat and sugar content. Neil Barnard, the founder and president of the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine, points out that 49% of the calories in whole milk and about 70% of the calories in cheese come from fat. And that much of that fat is the bad kind, the saturated fat. And all milk contains lactose sugar as well. About 55% of the calories in skim milk comes from lactose sugar, as an example. And while Americans rely on milk for calcium and proteins for decades, the blue zone diet people get these nutrients from plant-based sources. So if you look at the ingredients of broccoli, there's a lot of protein and calcium in broccoli. And people just don't think of it that way. And 1 cup of kale has the same amount of calcium as 1 cup of milk. Small amounts of sheep's milk and goat's milk product, especially full-fat, naturally fermented yogurt with no sugar added a few times weekly, are also okay in the blue zone diet. And eggs are consumed in all 5 blue zones, where people eat them on average 2 to 4 times a week. As with meat protein as a side dish, as I said. Eggs in the blue zone diet come from chickens that are ranged freely, and they eat a variety of natural foods. They do not receive hormones or antibiotics, and they produce slowly matured eggs that are naturally higher in omega-3 fatty acids. Factory produced eggs come from a maturity that's about twice as fast and bred by those chickens that are in the blue zones. Eggs provide complete protein that includes amino acids necessary for your body, plus B vitamins, vitamins A, D, and E, and minerals such as selenium. Data from the Loma Linda study showed that egg-eating vegetarians lived slightly longer than vegans. Okay, how can you do this? All right. So for dairy, try unsweetened soy, coconut, almond, cashew, any of these, hemp as a dairy alternative. Most have proteins as regular milk and they taste better. Every day, I have a cup of cashew milk heated with 100% cocoa. It's so delicious and amazing amount of antioxidants, and I'm not getting any dairy, and it's very filling. Satisfy your occasional cheese craving with cheese made from grass-fed goats and sheep. And try to buy small eggs. I'm kind of on the fence about if that works, but it might work. Because I'm worried if people will just use more of the small eggs. Okay, fill out a 1 egg breakfast with fruit, like I was saying earlier. So see how small, instead of the eggs being the main thing, it's just like on the side. And here's some cucumbers, and that looks like cottage cheese with fruit and almonds. And here we have a fried egg with a bunch of grilled vegetables and avocado. Now this is an interesting one. In baking, you can use a 1/4 cup of applesauce, a 1/4 cup of mashed potatoes, a small banana. What else do they have here? Tofu, a tablespoon of vinegar and baking soda. Just amazing that you could substitute these. I don't do too much baking, but I have used applesauce when I've made breads, and I have used bananas. But it's interesting to consider that these things will substitute well for eggs. Okay, so now I know I'm getting to everybody's Achilles heel. Slash sugar and carbs. I just went through a 21-day sugar detox with a client, so I understand. But it's something that we really want to think about. So consume more than 7 added teaspoons a day. So let's face it, you can't avoid sugar. It naturally occurs in fruits and vegetables and even milk, like we said. But that's not the problem. Between 1970 and 2000, the amount of added sugar in the food supply rose 25%. So this adds up to 22 teaspoons of added sugar that the average American consumes every day. Hidden sugars are found in soda, yogurt, muffins, dressings, and sauces, just to name a few. Too much sugar in our diet has been shown to suppress the immune system, making it harder to fend off diseases. It also spikes insulin levels, which can lead to diabetes, and it makes you fat, and it shortens your life. In blue zone diets, people consume about the same amount of naturally occurring sugars as North Americans do, but only 1/5 as much added sugar. So the key is that people in the blue zones consume sugar intentionally, not by addictive habit or by accident. So how can you do it? This is, before I go into how you can do it, this is how much sugar you should be having every day. So it's fascinating. The guidelines are that men should be having 36 grams of sugar per day, and women should be having 25 grams of sugar per day. That's the target. How can you do it? Make honey your go-to sweetener. So granted, honey also does spike your blood sugar levels the same way that sugar does, but it's harder to put on stuff and it doesn't dissolve well in cold liquid, so it just gets used less. Honey is a whole food product, and some honeys, like the Acarian Greece heather honey, contains an anti-inflammatory, anti-cancer, and antimicrobial products. Okay, so this is really interesting. So see how much sugar is in an Arizona iced tea? If you could see this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. There's 15 whoops, sorry. And in Minute Maid, and it just, we just don't think about it like this. Sugar sweetened soda is the single biggest source of added sugar in our diet. In fact, soft drink consumption may account for 50% of America's weight gain since 1970. One can of soda alone contains around 10 teaspoons of sugar. What's this guy over here? Oops. If you must drink soda, you could choose seltzer or sparkling water, and I actually provide all my clients with recipes for infusing water or seltzer with fruits and vegetables. One of my favorites is I put strawberries and basil in water. It's amazing. It's really good. Okay. Consume sweets as a celebratory food. So I'm not saying don't eat any sugar, but use it as an occasion to celebrate something instead of something that you're having every day. So the people in the Blue Zone do eat sweets, but they do it with like religious holidays or during a village festival. And in fact, they are often special sweets for special occasions. Limit desserts to around 100 calories if you can, and try to limit your consumption to 2 times a week. So my client that just went through the sugar detox is turning 50 tomorrow. So we both know that she's going to consume sugar, but we're just trying to keep it to the minimum. And consider fruit. There's a lot of sugar in fruit. Right? Fruit is nature's candy. I was mentioning earlier that I use little pieces of dried fruit in my nut mix in the morning. That the sugar that's in fruit is just naturally occurring. Watch out for processed food. Processed food sneaks sugar in on you. So some of these things you wouldn't even want, like why is sugar in ketchup? And how much sugar is in all these crazy, why is there sugar in peanut butter? There doesn't need to be sugar in peanut butter. And watch out for low-fat products. Often what they do when they make something low-fat or no-fat is they add a lot of sugar to it. Yeah, so here's an example of a yogurt label. And where's the sugar? So there's 22 grams of sugar in the low-fat, and there's 15 grams of sugar in the whole milk. So they're swapping out sugar for fat. To my mind, you're better off just having the whole yogurt. Okay, bread. Bread has been a staple in the human diet for at least 10,000 years. In 3 of the 5 Blue Zone diets, it is a staple. And while not typically used for sandwiches, it does make an appearance in most meals. But what they do differently is they're not having the white flour commercially produced sugar, which metabolizes very quickly in our bodies. Bread. The bread metabolizes quickly in our bodies to sugar, and it delivers this empty calorie spike in insulin levels. Whole grains have higher levels of fiber that the most commonly used wheat flours. Interestingly, barley was the food that most highly correlated with longevity in Sardinia, Italy. Other traditional Blue Zone breads are made with naturally occurring bacteria which digest the starches and glutens while making the bread rise. The process also creates an acid This is the sour in sourdough. The result is a bread with less gluten than breads labeled gluten-free. So I'm just going to repeat that because I thought that was fascinating. The process of baking sourdough results in a bread with less gluten than breads that are labeled gluten-free, with a longer shelf life and a pleasantly sour taste that most people like. So how can you do this? Okay, before I show you how you can do this, this is how many grams of carbs you should be consuming every day. So a man that's 160 pounds should be consuming 480 to 640 grams per day, and a woman that is about 125 pounds should be consuming 375 to 500 grams of carbs per day. Okay, so how can you do it? If you're going to eat bread, be sure it's authentic sourdough bread, like the ones they make in Acaria, Greece. It's a slow-rising bread and is made with lactobacteria as the rising agent, not commercial yeast. Your bakery will be able to tell you what they're using as the rising agent. Try sprouted or grain bread for your Blue Zone diet. When grains are sprouted, experts say starches and proteins become easier to digest. Sprouted breads also offer essential amino acids, minerals, and B vitamins that standard whole grain varieties and higher amounts of usable iron. Ounce for ounce, sprouts are thought to be among the most nutritious foods. Choose whole grain rye or pumpernickel over whole wheat. They have a low glycemic index, but look at the label. Avoid rye breads that list wheat flour as their first ingredient, and look for the bread that lists rye flour as its first ingredient. Most supermarkets won't have true rye bread. Whoops. Going to go to that. Choose or make bread that incorporates seeds, nuts, dried fruits, and whole grains. The whole food, like flaxseed, adds flavor, complexity, texture, and a nutritional value. So in general, there's a test you can do with bread. If you can squeeze bread into a little ball, that's the kind you don't want to eat. Look for heavy, dense, 100% whole grain breads that are minimally processed. Okay, retreat from meat. So I'm just going to briefly go over notes on protein. So we've all been taught that our bodies need protein for strong bones and muscle development, but what's the right amount? The average American woman consumes 70 grams of protein daily, and the average man more than 100 grams. This is too much. The CDC recommends 46 grams for women and 56 grams for men. But quantity is not all that matters. We need the right kind of protein. Protein, also known as amino acids, comes in 21 varieties. Of those, the body can't make 9, which are called the 9 essential amino acids because we need them and must get them from our diet. Meat and eggs will provide all 9 of these amino acids, while few plant sources do. But meat and eggs also deliver fat